So good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. First thing that I need to make note of is that this event is being filmed. So if anyone does have an issue with that, can you please let the cameraman know so that he doesn't get you whilst filming, and so will the Q&A. So if you have any issues with that, can you please direct yourself to the cameraman and make sure that he is completely aware of your needs. Other housekeeping issues that we need to discuss are that there are no fire alarms planned. So if you do hear, or drills planned, if you do hear the fire alarm sound, can we please vacate in an orderly fashion? There is an area directly outside the venue that will be showed to you by the staff here. Q&A at the end, so can we please make sure that our contributions are left till the end? And lastly, for any Zionist sympathizers here, hello, there will be some around, please can you keep your contributions to the very end? We're happy to have a dialogue, but this needs to be obviously first and foremost after the speakers have their say. So my name is Latifa Abu Chakra, and it's a pleasure for me to be chairing this event alongside, I'm genuinely humbled to be alongside such amazing speakers that we have here for you, some of them who have traveled a great distance to be with us today, to discuss this vital topic which has never been more pertinent, with the massacre in Gaza happening this week and upcoming elections in the UK. I'm honored to be chairing the event myself as a Palestinian, someone whose family has fled to Lebanon in the 1948 Nakba, someone who someone who has never visited her homeland, and someone who has been denied her non-negotiable right to return there, which was formulated in several modern treaties and conventions, and most notably in the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Fourth Geneva Convention, and of course, 1966 International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Now, to quote Professor Kamel Hawash in his latest article, to Israel, Palestinian blood isn't just cheap, it's worthless. And let us first declare that, as a collective, we reject this denial of international law by the colonial settler apartheid state of Israel of Palestinians in Palestine and abroad, and that we assert today and forevermore that the right of return is binding, and that our continued pressure through BDS and other activism, God willingly, it will be ours in our lifetime. They said that the old will die, and that the young will forget. In recent decades, the world, for the most part, has been ignorant of the crimes perpetuated by the Zionist regime. With the advent of social media and readily consumable outlets and information and news outlets and platforms, the Zionist regime can no longer hide its crimes, no matter how hard they try to deny or spin justification for their crimes. The tide of world opinion on Israel is changing. The hard work of those like yourselves and our amazing panelists have shown us that the fight for the liberation of Palestine is gaining momentum. There have been some notable recent victories that highlight this, and I want us all to cheer each one, mainly to show that we will not allow the magnitude of the oppression in Palestine make us feel helpless. Are we ready? Okay, can we have a cheer just to show that we're ready? Hey, okay. Oxford City has twinned itself with Palestine. HSBC divested last September from Elbit, Israel's largest weapons manufacturer. Following Trump's embassy move to Jerusalem, the youngest elected Lord Mayor of Sheffield, Majid, banned Trump from his city. Ireland has passed the Occupied Territories Bill that makes it illegal for any Irish entity to trade with or support Israel's settlements, illegal settlements in occupied territories. Solidarity expressed and acted upon by unions like Unite, Unison, GMB, NEU, ASLEF, UCU, RMT, FBU, TSSA, CWU, PCS, Trade Union Congress, and Thompson Solicitors. And of course, Labour passing a motion at last year's conference calling for the recognition of Palestine as a sovereign state. BDS and the two-way arms embargo. The University of Leeds divested from companies complicit in Israel's crimes against Palestine. Excellent. But before I properly introduce the topic and the speakers, I think we can all agree that the support we receive as Palestinians is essential. But it cannot be truly meaningful without it being Palestinian-led. Which leads me nicely to introduce the amazing work conducted by the Palestine Community Foundation that brought us here today. Palestine Community Foundation is an NGO, which was founded this time last year and has been busy ever since strengthening the community around Palestine in the UK through a range of projects and events. From panel discussions to Eid festivals, Debki dance tours to West Bank advocacy trips, PCF have achieved a huge amount in just 1 year. And here to say a little bit more about what they've done is our chairman, Shabbir Lakha, who not only has been a personal mentor to myself and a close friend, but a leader in establishing a connection for the Palestinian diaspora here in the UK for a long time prior to the PCF. He's a legend in his own right, and he's not going to like me introducing him like this, but I have to give him credit. He was raised in Gaza and came to the UK in 1981 to pursue his studies. He achieved an MA in political communication and campaigning. He is the current chairman of the Palestine Community Foundation, former chairman of the Association of the Palestinian Community in the UK, and he founded the Palestinian School in London in 2004, teaching the Arabic language and Palestinian culture. Can we have a huge round of applause for our chairman, Shabbir Lakha?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Before we start, can we please stand up for a minute silent in commemoration of those who were murdered in cold blood by the Israeli army last week in Gaza. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, friends and supporters, our distinguished speakers, good evening to you all, and thank you for coming this evening to take part in this very important discussion about Britain's involvement in the past, present, and future of Palestine. Our past is full of pain. Our past is full of pain at the illegal theft of our land. Our present is full of struggle against the ongoing injustice against us. But our future, I sincerely believe, is full of hope, thanks to the support of all of you. When I founded Palestine Community Foundation along with my daughter Razan, it was to bring the Palestinian people with all people who support justice. We are building a platform where together as a community we will work continuously for our cause. We do not react to events, but we will work seriously to make things happen. At PCF, our team have been working very hard to achieve that, and they have achieved what we couldn't have imagined in 1 year. So please join me in thanking Razan, Laura, Natasha, Omar, and Latifa. These people are the PCF team. So please give them a big round of applause. And also many thanks to the volunteers who helped us to organize this event. Within a year, we have held panel discussions in both English and Arabic. We have published 45 Palestinian Pulse, 45 Palestinian Pulse on a weekly basis, summarizing news concerning Palestine, attempting to plant it into the heart of the British establishment each and every week. We have produced 3 editions of our magazines, Palestine Voice, which you have been given this evening. We have supported over 20 universities in the UK, from Bradford, from Bristol to Aberdeen, assisting them and providing them with educational resources and assisting in organizing events and activities. In May, we have organized Ramadan Iftar, where we raised funds for medical aid for Palestinians. In June, we have organized Eid Festival, where our friends and supporters got together and celebrated Eid with us. In July, we have invited and toured a group of young Palestinian Dabka dancers all the way from Bethlehem to the UK, who performed and gave workshops at British schools to show our magnificent culture. They also performed at Pal Expo, Shubbak Festival at South Bank, and some flash mob shows, which was very interesting to the audience, who gave them a good reception. Laura, a few weeks ago, led our first advocacy trip to Palestine, Just Cycle, aiming to achieve more advocates for Palestine. And she has just achieved, and she has achieved exactly what she was supposed to do, and thanks to Laura. So, if you just arrived back from Palestine with Just Cycle, please stand up so we can welcome you home as well. I know there are some cyclists here. Thank you very much. We will not stop there as Israel continues its brutal and illegal attack against our people, but we will work and double our effort to work for peace and justice. And PCF is a place for all of us to come together with this aim. We have plans for the coming year, including a panel discussion on the situation in Gaza, another advocacy trip to Palestine, plus many other events. Ladies and gentlemen, your support means a lot to us. Please join us. Please join us, be part of our work and part of our hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think the summary of what PCF has done speaks for itself. They're an incredible organization. They're completely self-funded, which is incredible, and they do so much for the Palestinian cause. Any support that you can provide, please do it. At the very least, share their posts, retweet what they tweet. It's the very least that we can do for such an amazing organization. So, moving on to tonight's discussion, from Balfour to Boris Johnson, exposing and reversing Britain's role in the oppression of Palestinians. In 1917, we know that the Foreign Secretary, Arthur James Balfour, declared British support for the Zionist project of creating a national home for Jews in Palestine, in a letter now known as the Balfour Declaration for Palestinians. For Palestinians, this letter symbolizes the beginning of the destruction of our homeland. And this year, like every year, it is no surprise that Palestinian groups demand an official apology for it from Britain, both as a symbol to acknowledge the century of suffering it sparked, and as a first step in reversing Britain's structural colonial legacy, which continues to enable the oppression of Palestinians. But rather than apologize in November 2017 on the centenary of the declaration, Theresa May invited Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, my goodness. I'm nervous, guys, I don't know if you can tell. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to London, exclaiming her pride in Britain's pioneering role in creating Israel, whilst Boris Johnson, as Foreign Secretary, showed off the desk that Balfour supposedly sat at to write the letter. In contrast, Jeremy Corbyn put out a statement which read, Balfour promised to help establish a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, while pledging that nothing would be done to prejudice the rights of its existing non-Jewish communities. 100 years on, the second part of Britain's pledge has still not been fulfilled. And Britain's historic role means we have a special responsibility to the Palestinian people, who are still denied their basic rights. So let us mark the Balfour anniversary by recognizing Palestine as a step towards a genuine two-state solution of the Israel-Palestine conflict, increasing international pressure for an end of the 50-year occupation of the Palestinian territories, illegal settlement expansion, and the blockade of Gaza. Based on Corbyn's statement, it seems true to say that Labour want to do more to defend the rights of Palestinians, unlike this Conservative government, which has sought to bury Palestinian suffering at every opportunity. At this crucial juncture, during general election, we are promised that a Labour government will immediately recognise the state of Palestine, and it would be negligent of me now not to remind us all, present or watching later online, please register to vote before next Tuesday's deadline. But the following questions must also be posed. What Palestinian state is it that will be recognised? And is that simply enough? What really is Britain's historical and contemporary role in the oppression of Palestinians? Is Britain simply a natural observer, incapable of affecting real change on Israel's treatment of Palestinians? Or does Britain bear any responsibility for the millions of Palestinians living in exile as refugees? Or those living under 5 decades of Israel's brutal occupation of the West Bank? Or the 1 million children in Israel's 12-year siege of Gaza? And if it does bear responsibility, or has the ability to change the status quo, what must be done to protect the rights of Palestinians? Now joining us to help shed some light on these questions are the fantastic array of speakers that we have an incredible opportunity to listen to. Again, please can we make sure to save our questions until the end? And we have a hashtag that we'd like you to use if you are going to be putting this on your social media platforms, and that is hashtag Boris to Balfour to Boris. So hashtag Balfour to Boris. So let me introduce our keynote speaker for today, the renowned Israeli historian and activist Professor Ilan Pappé. Ilan is a titan in the field of having written 20 books, including A History of Modern Palestine, One Land, Two Peoples in 2004, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine in 2006, The Idea of Israel 2014, Israel and South Africa, The Many Faces of Apartheid in 2015, 10 Myths About Israel in 2017, and most recently, The Greatest Prison on Earth. He has devoted his career to exposing Israel's settler colonial story and advocating for justice for the Palestinians. We are so lucky to have him here, and it gives me no greater pleasure than to introduce him. Can we have a huge round of applause for Ilan Pappé?
Good evening. Thank you so much for your very kind introduction. And I want to thank the PCF for its important and crucial work that it has been doing. It's a new actor in the local scene, but you have managed in a short time to really enrich and inform our campaign that has started many years ago to educate the people in this country, its politicians, its journalists, its civil society, and to challenge the kind of messages and information and narratives that are still prevalent in the local media, academia, and politics, which are based on fabrication, misinformation, ignorance, and sometimes cynical manipulation of facts. And I think an NGO like yours is highly important for a struggle that is, of course, not over yet and will continue for a while. But information, knowledge, and building networks of solidarity is a very crucial part of that struggle. And I'm very proud and honored to be invited by you to this event. The topic tonight is about Britain and its accountability and responsibility for the question of Palestine. There actually are 5 dimensions to the British support for Zionism, and that also explain its policy towards the Palestine question, which have changed over time but are still with us today. The first, and sometimes under-researched and ignored aspect, which is still part of some of the position, or explains some of the position that Britain has taken over the years, including the Balfour Declaration, in support of the Zionization of Palestine and against the rights of the Palestinian as the indigenous and native people of the land. One dimension is the religious dimension, the evangelical Christian dimension. We have to remember that Zionism was first a Christian evangelical project before it was a Jewish project. In the mid-19th century already, leading British politicians were, in the name of evangelical Christianity, were talking about the right of the Jews to return to Palestine because it will precipitate the second coming of the Messiah, it will bring to the resurrection of the dead, and it would get us nearer to the end of time. And some of them strongly believed in it. And as you know, people like Tony Blair and others are still influenced by this kind of religious ideas, not to mention, of course, the Christian Zionists of the United States, who are, of course, a far more important factor in influencing global policy towards Palestine. But this idea is still there. And in many ways, it was one of the major reasons for the Balfour Declaration. There were secular reasons, if you want, for the granting of the Balfour Declaration. But I think researchers and historians sometimes ignore the importance of what today we will probably call Christian Zionists in the center of the British policy making in 1917 and still today. Sometimes you don't see it because these kind of Christian evangelical Zionists have their own organizations in the north of Britain, the west and east of Britain. You don't see them, they're not vociferous, but they exist, and they are networking this religious sacrosanct kind of support for Zionism. The second element is anti-Semitism. It's not surprising that one of the greatest anti-Semitic British politician of the 20th century, Lord Balfour, is associated with the creation of the State of Israel. Lord Balfour is the one who initiated, between 1905 and 1906, a series of legislation in the House of Commons to try and prevent Jewish refugees from Eastern Europe to come and settle in Britain because of pure anti-Semitism. When the years passed by since the Balfour Declaration, we understand that actually you can be an anti-Semite and a great supporter of Israel, as you can be an evangelical Christian that believes in the return of the Jews and yet believe that their return would actually create a Christian reality. Because in both cases, you get rid of the Jews in your own vicinity. And that's the major impulse, the major drive. And I think it's important to see these connections today. The third one is Islamophobia. Or, if you want, the dehumanization of Arab people at large, not only Muslims. Because British colonialism in the Arab world existed before the Zionist movement arrived in Palestine. And Britain dealt with the people of the Arab world in the same way that it dealt with the people of Africa the people of Southeast Asia. They looked as second-rate human beings. They looked as people who don't have the right for their own aspirations for independence, for their own freedom of expression, and so on. So it's not surprising that the Zionist perception of the Palestinians and the British perceptions of the Palestinians were based on the same dehumanization of the people of Palestine as a group of human beings whose aspirations, whose right to their own homeland is not going to be considered as a factor in forming British policy towards the question of Palestine. Still today in the British Foreign Office, still today when you read articles in the Daily Telegraph and the Times and even sometimes in the Guardian, not to mention of course Sky News and the BBC, you can still see that that kind of racist perception of the Palestinians as kind of a second-rate persons or human beings in this story is still informing their reports on the situation, their analysis, and their attitudes to the Palestinian demands over the years for the liberation of Palestine. The fourth element, which is a recent element, but a very powerful one, is, of course, the role of neoliberalism in forming British policy towards the question of Palestine. This is where the military industry in Britain plays a hidden role sometimes in fomenting the relationship between Britain and Israel, where, like the Israeli military industry, they view places like Gaza as fields of experiment for new weapons, so that they could prove their efficiency for prospective buyers in the world. And the British military industry and the Israeli military industry are very strongly connected. And this is just one element of the trade connections, financial connections, strategic connections that inform the British attitude towards Israel and Palestine. Finally, the last dimension, before I go to a short historical survey of how all these elements interplay, is the, and this is again a new thing that came after the Second World War, is the British willingness to be led by the United States and its interests when forming a policy towards Palestine. In this respect, Balfour is different from Trump because in 1917, in fact, the American policy, if there was such a policy towards Palestine, was actually quite positive. President Wilson was an American president who believed in the right of self-determination for the Palestinians, but he was ill in 1920 and he was excluded from the American policy. So I'm really talking about the American policy after the end of the Second World War, where the Americans kind of set the principle on which British policy towards the Palestine question should be addressed. There are kind of 6 or 7 very short historical juncture where you can see all these 5 elements interplay in the formulation of British policy towards Palestine. The Balfour Declaration is a place where Christian Zionists, Islamophobic personalities, and anti-Semitic politicians like Balfour joined forces together to write this letter that promised something that did not belong to Britain and take it away from the people it belonged to. The Balfour Declaration was important not so much as the letter that was declared in the House of Commons. Britain sent such letters making promises, quite often contradicting promises to people during the First World War. The important the importance of the Balfour Declaration was its incorporation in the mandate of Palestine, or the Mandate Charter of Palestine. Not that the mandate system was such an ideal system, but at least it was a declaration by the international community after the First World War that if people in the Arab world want to be independent, want to express their right for self-determination, it's the duty of the international community to help them to become independent. There was a caveat that the interests of Britain and France would be respected, and therefore the mandate system would allow Britain and France to be involved in these processes. But eventually Iraq became the homeland of the Iraqis, and Egypt the homeland of the Egyptians. And according to this principle, Palestine should have been the home of the Palestinians. But incorporating the Balfour Declaration in the mandatory system did not allow it to be fulfilled in the case of the Palestinians. And the only reason are all these mixture of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and Christian evangelical ideas that did not allow this to happen. Then we come to the mid-1920s. This is when the British mandate changes the land regime in Palestine, that for many years allowed people to buy land and sell land without moving the tenants who lived on the land for centuries. The Zionist movement was the first buyer of land in Palestine that did not only want the land, but wanted also to remove the tenants who lived on the land. For that, it needed the British support, and Britain actively supported with the first ethnic cleansing operations, one can call it that way, in the mid-1920s, when the first Palestinian villages disappeared, long before 1948, due to the change of land regime, and in some cases the British police and army came to evict the Palestinians from the first plots of land that the Zionist movement has purchased in Palestine. But of course, the worst part of the British responsibility comes in 1948. When Britain is still responsible for law and order between November 1947 to May 1948, when, according to the mandatory charter, it has to respect the dignity, the life and property of everyone who lives in Palestine, under the eyes of British soldiers and sometimes with the help of British soldiers. The Zionist movement begins already in February 1948, a massive operation of ethnic cleansing, targeting, while the British are still responsible for law and order, the Palestinian cities. Not the Palestinian countryside, the Palestinian cities. Because they knew that in the Palestinian cities, you had the political elite, the cultural elite, the social elite. And if you cut the elite from the people, you leave them defenseless later on when the 15th of May comes and British forces leave Palestine and the Jewish state is declared. Under the eyes of British soldiers and commanders, and sometimes through their facilitation, the city of Haifa was emptied by force from almost from all its 75,000 Palestinians. Similar fate awaited the people of Jaffa, Akka, Baisan, Safad. 11 Palestinian towns were depopulated in a way that reminds us of the depopulation of towns in the Middle East today after 2012. We were all horrified by the way some of the urban centers of Syria and Iraq and Libya and Yemen are destroyed from the air, how barrels of TNT are being thrown from aeroplanes. This was the fate of the Palestinian towns in a time where there was no television, where nobody filmed these things. But this was an herbicide, a genocide of towns that happened in 1 month, in April 1948, under the eyes of British officials and officers, and when Britain was still responsible for law and order. Some British politicians later on had some remorse about it, but obviously not enough, given the way British policy developed. I would end with two important, I think, points of the continuation of British responsibility. Of course, what happens through the years, from 1917 until today, is that Britain loses its international power. And when it becomes weaker in the international scene or on the international map or the global map, its responsibility is less significant, or its contribution is less significant. So obviously, it was far more important it's far more important to look at what Britain did in 1917 to 1948 than to look at what Britain did after 1948. But we should never forget the 1956 Suez Campaign, when Britain misinformed, the British government misinformed its own people in order to try and destroy an Arab leader that was committed openly to continue the struggle for the liberation of Palestine. This was a colonialist act many years after supposedly the British Empire was not there anymore. And I think this is also important, the willingness of Britain to stand against not only the Palestinian national movement, but against the will of the people of the Arab world to deal with the one open wound from the colonialist and imperialist era that has not been healed yet, the wound of Palestine. And finally, and not less importantly, the behavior of Britain as a member of the EU, or the member of Europe, doesn't have to be the EU, a member of the West, with its record of involvement and complicity in the destruction of Palestine and the Palestinians. The behavior of that particular Britain in the end of the last century and in this century, where it could play a major role in defining a European position that shows responsibility for the fate of the Palestinians, especially at an age where we know exactly the nature of the crimes committed against the Palestinians, whether it is in the West Bank or in the Gaza Strip or in the Nakab, or the continued refusal to allow the Palestinian refugees to return. That this particular regime of British governments, doesn't matter from which party, has never seen its duty to be at the forefront of a European policy that would say we were the chefs that cooked an impossible formula for the Palestinians. We were behind the idea that in order to compensate the Jews of Europe for the Holocaust, we will help them to colonize Palestine and dispossess the Palestinians. Britain played a crucial role in bringing back Germany as a civilized nation after the Second World War, and did it with the help of Israel, which was the first state that recognized West Germany, because the quid pro quo was very clear. If you do that, you will have an unconditional support of Britain and Europe for the Zionist policies on the ground. That not one British politician until Jeremy Corbyn of a senior position in British politics, there were some marginal ones who did it, that not one senior politician in British politics was willing to challenge this horrific formula, apologize to the Palestinian people, and more importantly, formulate a policy that supports unconditionally the rights of the Palestinians for self-determination and independence, is a shameful stain in the history of this country. And I will finish and say it's not surprising that for the first time, when there is a senior politician who is a decent person, who fought all his life against racism and anti-Semitism and believes, sometimes very naively, in the equality of people and justice. It's not surprising that when such politician has the potential of becoming the leader of this country, Israel is using the Anglo-Jewish community to weaponize anti-Semitism in order to destroy a politician that can change not only Britain's policy towards Palestine, but also Europe's policy towards Palestine. The ridiculous allegation of anti-Semitism is only there because this is a moment of truth for Britain. It's not too late. I think that's the message that we get. It's not too late for Britain to feel accountable and responsible for the role it played in the destruction of Palestine and the dispossession of the Palestinians. And the Israelis rightly understand that once Britain would do this U-turn, once Britain would be willing to commemorate the Balfour Declaration as a horrendous crime and apologize rather than celebrate it, other countries in Europe would follow suit. And finally, we will have a proper counter position to the unconditional support of the United States to the State of Israel. So they know what they're doing in the Israeli Ministry of Strategy, as it's called. They do know what they're doing. Do we know what we are doing? By apologizing, by saying, no, yes, there is a rise in anti-Semitism, but it's not exactly our fault, and so on, instead of taking the initiatives. And every minute that we appear in the media, and we don't talk of Palestine, but we answer the stupid allegation of anti-Semitism, is a wasted minute of our time for a struggle that should continue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Another round of applause, please, for Ilan Pappé. What an amazing... So this is what I got from the speech. It's a moment of truth for Britain. Vote Labour. Now, to introduce our second speaker, we are privileged to be joined by Salma Karmi-Ayyoub, a Palestinian British criminal barrister and external consultant for the Palestinian human rights organization Al-Haq. Please welcome this real-life heroine with a loud applause.
Wow, thank you for the introduction. I'm not sure if I can live up to it, but I'll try. It's always difficult to follow Ilan, but I hope to build actually on what he said and to echo some of what he said in considering the legacy of Britain in oppressing the Palestinians. And what I wanted to focus on is primarily Britain's use of law and legalistic mechanisms to do two things, mainly. The first was at the time when Britain ruled over Palestine, to deny Palestinian national and collective rights in any part of Palestine. And the second use of law and legalistic mechanisms was to suppress, through very draconian means, any form of dissent to the ambitions of Jewish settler colonialism in Palestine. And the way that Britain paved the way, sorry, I don't know if this is Mike all right? Yeah, and the way that Britain paved the way for Israel's subsequent policy and the similarities essentially between the uses of law and the legalistic mechanisms between Britain and Israel in achieving these twin objectives. So what I mean to say is, of course, Ilan has mentioned the Balfour Declaration, which was issued by the British government in 1917. And because it characterized the Palestinian people as merely being existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine that had only civil and religious rights, and it made no mention whatsoever of collective or national rights for the Palestinians, but it did mention the creation of a Jewish national home, and the fact that, as Ilan mentioned, the Balfour Declaration was then incorporated into the mandate for Palestine. What that meant was that Britain started essentially this policy of denying the existence of a Palestinian people in a juridical sense, a people who had a right to self-determination, a right to national rights in Palestine, and to only recognize potential national rights of a Jewish settler population in Palestine. And the mechanism by which Britain did this is it employed something called a concept of sovereign exception, in which it said that it, as a sovereign power, was entitled to decide that Palestine was a unique case in which the usual principles for the mandate systems of all the other countries at the time, which was at the central to those mandate systems, was the idea that people would be, the native populations had a right to self-determination. Britain said it would essentially suspend the application of that principle because it saw Palestine as unique. So, for example, is that okay with the sound? Is it any better? Because I feel like it's really terrible. You can hear me? Okay, I saw someone wincing like in the front row, so that I was a bit worried. Okay, so in other words, what Britain did is it employed this concept of sovereign exception, and it said, we decide that Palestine is a unique case because it's holy to 3 religions, because... Okay, like that? Yeah, okay. Because the situation of Jews requires special attention, and as a result, we choose to suspend the notion that the native population of Palestine should have a right to self-determination in the way that the native populations of the other mandate systems in the Arab world did. So, for example, Lord Balfour says this in 1919. He says, in the case of Palestine, we deliberately and rightly decline to accept the principle of self-determination. We regard Palestine as being absolutely exceptional. And then another member of the British establishment shortly afterwards, called Lord Milne, echoed the sentiment, saying, Palestine can never be regarded as a country on the same footing as the other Arab countries, due to the fact, essentially, that it was holy to 3 religions. And he said, the future of Palestine cannot possibly be left to be determined by the temporary impressions and feelings of the Arab majority of the country of the present day. So in other words, Britain defined Palestine as being exceptional, and in so doing, felt itself entitled to suspend the usual process, which was the recognition of the native population there to self-determination. And Britain was able to use this mechanism, this so-called sovereign exception, because it was a sovereign power. So what it was able to do is declare a situation it was dealing with as exceptional and say the normal rules don't apply and we need a specialized legal regime to deal with this scenario. And in so doing, what happens is that the specialized legal regime regulates the sovereign power, in this case Britain's actions, and makes them seem apparently lawful, when in reality the whole situation exists outside of the recognized legal norms. And I'm bringing this up to point out that Israel employed basically the exact same mechanism, and has done throughout its history, to also deny Palestinian national rights or collective rights in any part of Palestine, and in order to promote Jewish settler colonialism. So, for example, and just briefly, Israel argues that the West Bank and the Gaza Strip are exceptional in that they don't have a sovereign, they don't recognize, so they say that we occupied the territory, but the territories don't have a true sovereign to which they would revert after occupation. And they use this notion to justify suspending the application of occupation law. They say it doesn't apply de jure, which means as a matter of law, the Fourth Geneva Convention doesn't apply in the West Bank and Gaza. And as a result, Israeli settlement construction is not illegal. This is Israel's argument. So again, by invoking this concept that the situation that Israel deals with in the West Bank and Gaza is exceptional and unlike any other, Israel justifies suspending the usual norms in order to promote its settler colonial project. And I want to just point out a couple of other laws or legal mechanisms Israel has employed to deny Palestinian nationalism and to promote its own settler colonial ambitions, which it wouldn't be able to do, I think, without, in a sense, Britain having provided a precedent for doing that. The first is that Israel denationalized Palestinian refugees that it expelled during its establishment in 1948 en masse by bringing in a law in 1952 that basically defined Israeli citizens as only being people present in Israel between 48 and 52, which of course meant everyone who was expelled was outside of the framework. And Israel has always maintained the position that those people are not citizens or nationals of what became the new Israeli state. So Israel has no legal obligation to admit them back into their own country. And it would only have been able to adopt that and maintain that position because it didn't view the Palestinians that it expelled as a national group or as any kind of collectivity having ties and therefore rights to the land of Israel-Palestine. It had to conceive of them as a kind of random group of refugees who just happened to find themselves in camps and require a humanitarian solution of some kind. And of course, Israel has also never recognized Palestinian citizens of Israel, the ones who remained and were not expelled in 48, has never accorded them national minority status. It doesn't recognize that those Palestinians have any kind of collective rights. So the latest evidence of this erasure of the Palestinian peoplehood and the notion that Palestinians have self-determination rights in any part of Palestine is Israel's nation-state law that some of you will be aware of. It was passed in 2018, and it basically says explicitly that the Jewish people are the only people with a right to self-determination in the land of Israel. And thus, it promotes Jewish, as it were, self-determination and denies any corresponding right to the Palestinian people. So what I hoped and was clear from that description is that Britain, by employing this concept of sovereign exception, that is, defining a situation as exceptional, unlike any other, and requiring its own rules, was able to deny Palestinian national rights in Palestine as early as the Balfour Declaration and onwards. And Israel essentially adopted that position and a lot of the same legal mechanisms to continue to do the same in Israel proper and in the West Bank and Gaza. How am I doing for time? Can I address another thing? Okay. The other the other sort of use of law that I wanted to highlight, which Britain and Israel have in common, is the use of emergency regulations or declaring a state of emergency in order to pass very draconian measures to suppress any resistance that Palestinians may have expressed against their erasure as a people and the promotion of Jewish settler colonialism in Palestine. So some of you will be aware that there was a great revolt in which the Palestinian population of Mandate Palestine at the time, between 36 and 39, launched a kind of a revolt and sustained resistance against British policy in Palestine. And Britain responded by imposing martial law and as declaring a state of emergency. So once again, we have an example of this use of the sovereign exception. Britain said, we're in an exceptional situation, unlike that which exists in normal times, and thus we have to declare a state of emergency, and the normal rules won't apply. We can bring in martial law, and we can bring in much more draconian measures and punishments than would ever have been permitted normally, and all do that under the guise of legality or the guise of some sort of lawful coherence within the system itself. And that was a tactic, of course. This state of emergency situations to bring in repressive measures was a tactic that Britain used in other parts of its colonial empire. But in any event, Britain passed in 1937 an order in council, and that gave the British Mandate government the authority to establish military courts, to deport Palestinian leaders, to exclude people from re-entering Palestine, to demolish homes as collective punishment, to impose curfews, to declare whole villages as closed areas. I don't know if any of this is sounding familiar for those of you who know a lot about the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. So, for example, at that time, Safad, a town in northern Palestine, was under curfew for about 140 days. at one point in 1938, I believe. And it's estimated that in that time, between 36 and 39, through the promulgation of these emergency laws, British forces killed, wounded, detained or exiled about 10% of the adult male population of Palestine. So just to give you an idea of the scope of repression. And in 1945, Britain followed this up with these, what they called emergency defense regulations, to deal with both Palestinian and, in fact, Zionist Jewish actions, that were taking place against the British forces at the time. And those emergency regulations basically gave the British authorities this wide range of repressive powers that I've mentioned. Now, Israel, after its establishment, again used very similar means to control the Palestinians and to crush any dissent the Palestinians had to the establishment of the new state. So the precursor to the Israeli Knesset also declared a state of emergency, so applying again the mechanism of sovereign exception. And that state of emergency is, I believe, still in place today in Israel. And because it declared a state of emergency, it adopted the very same defense emergency regulations that the British Mandate government had in place, and maintained martial law on the Palestinian population of Israel. And when in 1949, Ben-Gurion reviewed whether or not this military rule over the Palestinians should be maintained. And he said, it should, because the military regime came into existence to protect the right of Jewish settlement in all parts of the state. So in other words, military rule and the use of these repressive measures were a mechanism by which Israel could promote its settler colonial ambitions. And I'll just say that the very same emergency laws that Britain introduced that allow things like collective punishment through house demolitions, deportations, administrative detention, which is an internment, so basically it's imprisonment without trial, were employed by Israel both within its borders and after 1967. Many of those same mandatory laws are still in place and are used as the basis for which Israel carries out certain repressive actions today, like, for example, house demolitions. The legal basis for house demolitions, punitive house demolitions, are those British Mandate laws. So what I'm trying to say is that Israel inherited a series of tactics that Britain had put in place, paved the way for legislatively and policy terms, to suppress the Palestinians, prevent any expressions of Palestinian national identity and any resistance to Israeli settler colonial ambitions. And so I don't really, I was thinking about the question of Britain's role today and whether or not how appalled or angry or surprised we should be about Britain's support of Israel. And this history, this kind of legal history, led me to conclude that if there are two kind of main pillars of Israeli policy towards the Palestinians, being one, the denial of Palestinian self-determination rights, and two, the disregard for human life that allows these very repressive measures to be taken against those who dissent, those two pillars of Israeli policy were directly inherited from British Mandate rule, and it was really Britain that originated them. And so we shouldn't really be that surprised when we see the status of Britain's policy towards Israel-Palestine today. So I'm sorry to be very depressing, but that's the way I see it. Thanks very much.
Another round of applause, please. Well done. So I actually did a degree in law, and I didn't pursue the career because I was completely disillusioned with the practice. And it's because of these kind of examples that make you think that actually the law doesn't bring about justice, it's a tool of the powerful. But for that reason, I think it's important that when hopefully we have friends, family members, cousins, daughters, sons go into law we need to explain to them that actually, yes, it is a tool of the powerful, and we must become the powerful so we can dismantle this type of oppression, hopefully in our lifetime. Okay, moving on to our next speaker, because you don't want to hear me babble. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce my comrade, Shabbir Lakha, who is an officer at Stop the War Coalition, a campaigner at the People's Assembly, and an organizer for the Stand Up to Trump protests. Is there anything he doesn't do? I don't know, let's find out. Please welcome Shabbir with a loud applause.
Thank you for that introduction. I want to start, we had a moment of silence at the beginning, but I want to start by also paying tribute to the 34 Palestinians who were killed 4 days ago by Israeli airstrikes in Gaza, including 8 members of the Abu Malhous family, the youngest of whom was only 3 months old. I want to thank PCF for organizing this brilliant event and for the panel for the great speeches so far. I think From Balfour to Boris Johnson is an apt title, because rather than the neutral arbiter that is often portrayed as Britain's role in the mainstream, what we're looking at in actuality is 100 years, over 100 years of Britain's continuous facilitation of the ethnic cleansing and oppression of the Palestinians. Now, when I was preparing for this talk, I told myself, don't try and do a historical analysis when you're on a panel with Ilan Pappé. But here we are, and I hope I'm not too repetitive and I encapsulate some of what Ilan's already said. But what I really want to try and do is build a framework that we can understand why Britain has played this role and is playing this role and what we can do about it. And I think the first thing to say is that in 1917, when Lord Balfour, then the Foreign Secretary, made the now infamous Balfour Declaration, which we've talked about, committing Britain to build a Jewish homeland in Palestine, this was done with one primary objective, and that was British imperialism. Bernard Reagan's book, The Balfour Declaration, which I highly recommend, documents the discussions taken place in the cabinet at the time of the Balfour Declaration, and show how one of the main impetus for Britain to undertake this commitment was so that it could control Palestine for the purpose of protecting the Suez Canal and creating a land route across the Middle East, which would allow it to bring the goods exploited from British colonial India to the Mediterranean for easy transport. And indeed, this declaration was made a year and a half after the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which had been made with France and Russia, where they had carved up the Middle East for this exact purpose of determining trade routes, etc. And we should put to bed the myth that the British government had any benevolent aim of helping persecuted Jewish people. As Ilan said, it was under Balfour's government, when he was Prime Minister in 1905, that the Aliens Act was passed with the primary objective of stopping Jewish refugees from being able to come to Britain. And the real intentions of Britain in the Middle East, in Palestine in particular, were put in plain words by Ronald Storrs, who was the military governor of Jerusalem, who said that the aim was to create a loyal Jewish Ulster in a sea of potentially hostile Arabism. And I think this quote explains both the model of the creation of Israel being a settler colonial endeavor, and also that Britain was leveraging against the Arab nationalism that it itself had stoked in order to appeal to the Arabs to fight against the Ottomans during the First World War, and the broken promises that it had made at the time. And this is the foundation of Israel that Britain laid out, and the role that Britain has played to this day. The tactics used by Britain in suppressing the Palestinian revolt in 1936 to 1939 that Salma mentioned are exactly what we see Israel use in Gaza today when they're suppressing the Great Return March. The methods of torture used against imprisoned Palestinians are exactly what we see Israel using today against Palestinians. And of course, since the creation of Israel in 1948, Britain has given a consistent diplomatic, political and military support, which has ensured Israel's ability to oppress the Palestinian people and to do it with impunity. And we can look at Tony Blair, who was appointed the Middle East envoy and based in the aptly named American Colony Hotel in Jerusalem. And we can look at our current government, headed by Boris Johnson, who has done everything he can in his power, previously as Foreign Secretary and now as Prime Minister, to support not just Israel, but particularly the right-wing government of Netanyahu. And we have a Home Secretary, Priti Patel, who was fired from her previous cabinet position in Theresa May's government for having secret meetings with Netanyahu and senior Israeli ministers, and was caught trying to divert international aid to the IDF in occupied Golan Heights. So what we have is a continuum of British imperialism, which is a central factor in the ongoing Nakba for the Palestinian people. And I think it's critical to understand Israel in this context of imperialism so that we can correctly understand, as Palestine solidarity activists, that our principal enemy is the British government and the British state. And it's based on that we can understand what we need to do about it. So there's a couple of points I want to make in this framework so that we can understand our role. And the first is that Zionism is racism. It is a product of imperialism. It may have at some point in the 19th century been a debate within the Jewish community in response to rising anti-Semitism in Europe, but it is no longer an abstract idea. It is realized in Israel, and it is what Israel is. It's an ideology underpinning racist settler colonialism and ethnic cleansing and apartheid, and importantly, one whose role is maintaining the imperialism in the Middle East. The second I want to mention is about the Israel lobby, which has become something taboo to talk about, but which very much exists, and we've seen the evidence of it, not least in the Al Jazeera expose a few years ago. But by understanding that Israel is a product and an arm of Western imperialism, we can see clearly that the Israel lobby is not the way that the Israeli government influences British foreign policy, because ultimately Britain's strategic aims and Israel's strategic aims are one and the same. But it's a way that our own British state uses institutions of such as Parliament and others to influence policy making, so that it can determine exactly how British foreign policy is navigated in regards to Israel. And thirdly, this leads to me saying that this is why BDS has had such an impact, because as much as it is affecting Israel's economy, it is making Israel a pariah state in British public consciousness, and is directly impacting on Britain's ruling class. And this is the role that Palestine solidarity has played in Britain during this time, and why it's under such attack at the moment. It's no surprise that Israel's most successful spin doctor, Mark Regev, was made the ambassador to Britain, and why so much money and political capital is being used to try and outlaw BDS. And even now, Boris Johnson has pledged that a Tory government, if it wins on December the 12th, will seek to make sure that councils can no longer boycott goods from Israeli settlements. So it's why such a massive effort has been made to equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, which is what Ilan mentioned. And this is a means to attack our movement and to smear Jeremy Corbyn, who is on the cusp of becoming Britain's first anti-imperialist and anti-Zionist prime minister. And you only have to look at how some of the attack lines are being used also against Bernie Sanders in the US, a Jewish Democratic senator, or against Ilhan Omar in a blatantly Islamophobic witch hunt, to see how this attack is entirely cynical. And you can contrast that with Boris Johnson, who has not only openly been racist, but has formed alliances with explicitly anti-Semitic governments in Hungary, Austria, Poland, and elsewhere, and yet faces no criticism because he is pro-Israel. And similarly with Donald Trump. So, what can we do about this? I know it's a bleak picture, but there is something we can do. And the first I want to say is that, and I want to borrow a phrase from the brilliant MP Laura Pidcock, who says we need to bring our politics to every space that is available to us. And we need to do that with Palestine, and we need to be staunch in our anti-Zionism and fight back against the witch hunt, whether it's in the media and against Jeremy Corbyn, or it's prevent on our campuses and in our communities. And we must speak the truth in every space that we possibly can. The second is that we need to confront British imperialism head on. Trump has openly forged an Israel-Saudi nexus, preparing it for war with Iran. And we've already seen in the last few months that Israel has played the role of bombing so-called Iranian targets in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, and is openly calling for confrontation with Iran. In September, Netanyahu and Mike Pence both visited Boris Johnson to discuss what they can do about Iran. And so we have to recognize that the possibility of war with Iran is on the horizon, and that this is entirely connected with the Palestinian struggle. Because at the same time as this is happening, Trump has given Netanyahu the green light to pass the nation-state law, to escalate house demolitions and build settlements. He has legitimized Israel's claim on Jerusalem and the Golan Heights, and essentially endorsed the barbaric mass murder of Palestinians in Gaza, everything from the blockade to the airstrikes, to the sniping down of Palestinians who are participating in the Great Return March. And so the anti-war struggle is the Palestine struggle, and the anti-Trump struggle is the Palestine struggle. And that's why I hope that everyone here is going to be on the demonstration on the 3rd of December, when Donald Trump comes to London for the NATO summit. And you can grab a leaflet outside of the Stop the War stall, because I was privileged to be in Palestine in June, and I saw firsthand the sadistic, brutal military occupation the Palestinians are living under. And I can tell you that it's getting worse, and it will get worse if Donald Trump's deal of the century, so-called, is realized in any form. And we know that Boris Johnson and our government is completely collaborating with this and will be part of it. So I was proud to help organize the demonstrations against Trump when he came earlier this year and last year. And what made me most proud was to see the number of Palestinian flags that were present and represented on that demonstration. So I hope it will be the same again this time. We need to turn out against Trump and the warmongers. We need to make Palestine an issue in this general election. And we need to get organized and do our part to elect a prime minister who has always stood with Palestine, and will go some way in reversing this over 100-year-long oppression of the Palestinian people. Thank you.
Wow. Oh, makes me so proud to know. I know these people, guys. I actually hang out with them. Like, oh, my life is so good. Absolutely, though, the fight against Zionism is an international fight. It's a fight against the far right, and it's something that is connected everywhere. It's connected to everything. And I agree, Laura is an amazing MP, and when she says that we need to allow our politics to occupy every space, that means at home with your families, that means at university with your professors, with your friends who think that prevent isn't an issue, with the friends that think that Israel should have a right to exist. Everyone should be having this discussion. Now, lastly, we have the inspiration that is Adie Mormech, a human rights advocate who has taught English and lectured in the Gaza Strip. He is now involved in Manchester Palestine's actions occupation of the Israeli arms company. Hands up if you guys saw it, raise your hand. It was in the news, it was epic, right? Can we have a huge round of applause for the superhero that is Adie?
Thanks. Thank you very much. Great to be here. Thank you, everybody. Wonderful speakers. The most important thing first is that I'm sort of involved a lot with the reverse side of the angle regarding British complicity with Israel's crimes against Palestinians. And the bottom line is we're all active agents in this, okay? We can all do something. And this is a crucial point that we shouldn't ever forget. There is a framework that happened before. It's not exactly the same, but at the same time, South Africa, there was a mass movement around the world, especially in Britain, that actually did say, right, we're going to cut all ties with South Africa, the white regime in South Africa, and we're going to say no more complicity anywhere. And there was students never buying Barclaycard, there was lots of pickets, sporting events picketed and stopped. And this was ongoing for many years, and eventually, along with, most importantly, the heroic resistance on the ground in South Africa, there was actually movement, at least political change. Obviously, there's a lot of work still to do. But when Mandela says our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians, when Tutu says that in parts it's worse than apartheid South Africa, having been to Palestine, and Mandela, the grandson of Mandela, comes to England and says it's the worst ever apartheid, then we know, especially when they're calling for BDS, boycott, divestment and sanctions, this is exactly what we can do, individually and collectively. It's a group thing. Now, you've got to make the connect between where we're at here in England now, your lives and what you can do, what space you've got, what juice you have left after a hard day at work. And you make that connect in terms of what it is that's complicit and where we can win campaigns. Because for us, to be honest with you, I was in Gaza for 2 years, so I can make the connect very easily. I went there in 2010, and I was a teacher. I taught a family, the Samouni family. You should check them out online, Samouni. They lost 29 members of their extended family in 2009, 29 members of their extended family. They were rounded up, and the parents were shot and attacked in their houses in January the 3rd to January the 7th. And I taught the kids there. And I was going in, and I was brought in by the kids because there were often no parents around. And there I was being brought tea. It was 7-year-olds taking care of 2-year-olds, an amazing bunch. And I'm still in touch with them. And you know, here's the thing. I'm on the phone to them in the last couple of days while last week, while the bombings are happening in Gaza. And they're saying they're really afraid. And of course they're afraid because they went through a horrific time. There was 100 of them all rounded up in a house. Some had already been killed. Parents had already been killed. A woman had a baby while they were cordoned off in this house. All their houses were being bombed. They made 145 calls to the Red Cross. No one was allowed to come because the Israeli soldiers were stopping them. And this is real. This happened. It's unbelievable. I asked 11-year-old Mona Samouni, who was there, and I said, what message do you have for the people in England? And she said, take care of your parents. I don't have any parents anymore. I can't take care of them. That's what she says to me. It was through an interpreter at the time. And I'm looking at this, and what am I saying to them on the phone when the bombs were dropping just this last week, and another family, Malou's family, was destroyed. And this is where, when I got back, I was there also in 2012. I was there during the bombing in 2012. It was Operation Pillar of Cloud. And during that bombing, you know, we were in the hospitals. The kids were coming in one by one. I was there for a year, and to the intensive care unit. And it was, you know, and there was parents outside screaming, crying, praying for their kid to be alive. And we knew that this 2-year-old Hanin had just hemorrhaged. And what, you know, we're walking out, and this is the bottom line. This is where these weapons are being dropped. This is the end result of the profits that are being made by actually Israeli arms factories in this country, let alone the industry that they are building on the deaths of so many and the rivers of blood that are running through Gaza, even this last week, let alone the bombing in 2012. There was 170 killed then and 1,000 injured when we were there. That was 8 days of it. And the bombs are unbelievable. It's like every single thing that is normally stable and solid is absolutely shaking. It's mini earthquakes everywhere. It's a population that's mostly kids in Gaza. What do you go through, let alone whether you get a direct hit or not? What are you going through? Now, during the bombing in 2014, obviously I'd come back by then, and you know, we got ourselves together and said, enough, this is crazy. There was at that time over 1,000 that were killed. And there was some people from London Palestine Action and myself, and we went on the roof, not this factory, another Israeli arms factory in Shenstone, which is Elbit owned. It's called UAV Engines, and they make unmanned aerial vehicle engines. And Elbit is Israel's largest manufacturer of weapons. They're the biggest manufacturer of drones, and also they've had people exclaiming how they're testing on Gaza. You know, you've got people actually saying, for example, one of the in Der Spiegel, speaking to the German magazine, Avner Ben-Zakin, head of the Israeli Army's technology and logistics, said, if I develop a product and want to test it in the field, I only have to go 5 or 10 kilometers from my base and I can look and seeing what is happening with the equipment. I get feedback, so it makes the development process faster and much more efficient. So their stock increases the more they're bombing Gaza. So we decided, we went on top of this factory. Now look, there are many ways in which we can do direct action or just action, but it means dynamism, it means getting in there, it means we've got more in the tank. So we went up there and we closed it for 3 days. While I was on the roof of that factory, an Elbit-owned factory, making engines for drones, one of my students, because I taught in the university as well, was killed along with her entire family by a drone. She, her 2 little babies, her husband and her mother-in-law, all killed by a drone. And we're on top of an Israeli arms factory, an Elbit-owned. Elbit make the Hermes 450 and the Hermes 900. Most of the drones are made by them. So who knows if any component was made while we were on that factory roof. But we closed it for 3 days. Interestingly, they dropped the charges because they didn't want the bad publicity. 2,200 people were killed during those 51 days of Gaza in 2014, 500 children. So we've continued to build not only the arms campaigns, but also the campaigns against all of the complicit companies. And we have an arms factory on our doorstep in Manchester, because we're in Manchester, and we've galvanised local people in Oldham. We'd already done a lot of petitioning. We'd done loads of stalls in town, because it takes, to win campaigns, as you know from history, it takes everything. And it does need some direct action as well. I'm doing it because it's a key component of winning a campaign. If you look at any, civil rights, anti-apartheid movement, women's rights, LGBT, anything you like, it's got, everything mattered. The same with South Africa, of course it did. And so we went up again to this factory. This was in August, and it was, July the 1st. It was a 5-year anniversary of the bombing of Gaza. And actually Brighton, the guys in Kent, a lot of Brighton activists did it on the same day. We had some sort of coordination. And we went on the roof of this old, now it's actually a 6-storey building, so it wasn't as easy, and a few of us didn't make it, but then a few of us did, thankfully. And we closed it again for 3 days. And we were on the roof for 3 days, and we closed it. And it woke the whole city up. Now we've suddenly got councillors who want to hear from us. Now we've suddenly got loads of locals who know all about the campaign. And it's very dynamic now suddenly. We've got a lot of young people involved as well now, And so this is where you can have a direct impact. Now, I'm not saying everybody needs to go on the roof, but at the same time, you can support, you can get out and into the streets, you can speak to people where the complicity is, and you can take action yourselves. Because, I've got to say, you're here now, which is fantastic. We've heard some brilliant speakers, fantastic. Nothing has changed for Palestine yet until you go away and do something about this and take on what they've said. And the reason, and I've got to say as well, they're running scared, Elbit, because we got off again. Obviously they arrest us. We're in the cell for 20 hours. And then the next day, it was the Monday because it was a weekend, I get a call from Oldham Police Station saying you can come and get your climbing equipment and your banners back because we got no further action. So So we've got all our banners out and everything else ready now. I was almost going to just take it and go straight up to the top. And so, look, Gaza, they're marching towards the bullets every Friday. Okay, I was there during the demonstrations there. Okay, so that's what they're facing when they protest. When they take action, they are looking at, there's over 200 people being killed, 6,000 shot with live ammunition. And this is real. They're going out and they don't know whether it's going to be the last day on the planet. Ahmed Deeb, a 20-year-old, was killed right next to me when I was on the demonstrations. This was in 2010 when some started with a bit of a flourish at that point as well. So bearing that in mind, just how much, when I came back from Gaza, for me, it was like, how much do we have in the tank? We've got way more in the tank. When you see that level of resistance, when you see that level of fronting up, and we can stick our chests out and front up a whole lot more, frankly. And look at what we did. We won with HSBC. We've been doing that campaign all around the country, and I'm really pleased to see Latifa and all these other young people given a platform, because one of our own in Manchester, Huda Amouri, was a real galvaniser of boycott, divestment and sanctions in Manchester. Yeah, let's give her a round of applause. And revolutionised BDS national campaign, because she's joined another good organisation as well, Palestine Solidarity Campaign, where she has just taken it on and done BDS all around the country when it wasn't happening that much, frankly. And now guess what happens? We won. They divested from Elbit. Elbit, the owners of this factory, HSBC, this huge bank, this, stuck in lots of horrible things, generally investing in all sorts of capers, decided to divest from Elbit. So, and this is because we mobilised around the country. And so it is about, look, I want to get Corbyn in as well, believe me, I'm out and about, I'm knocking and everything, I'm door knocking all over the place. But at the same time, you can also have a direct impact on corporate complicity. And that's where we won that. And it's going to take more, and it's going to take a lot of effort, but we can do it. Look at Leeds University, and they divested, and that's because we had national coordination. We had a big student conference in Manchester, and everyone came, and we learned how to have the tools to do boycott, divestment, and sanction that Israel knows is working. Why are they putting hundreds of millions of pounds into trying to stop it? More than that, actually. So please, all I'm saying is, take action. Front up. Look at what's happening in Gaza. Look what they're going through. They're young kids marching. I asked one of them, why are you marching, mate? You're going to go to the fence with that? Because there's a soldier there now. He said, look, I'd rather die standing than die in my bed. And he said that. And this is for real. That's the choice young kids are making. If that's their choice, our choice is easier. Whatever our lives are, our choice is easier than that. And we've got a lot more to offer. We've got a lot more to give. And if we give it some, I swear, we can build the BDS. They're scared of it. It's growing. We can definitely hold them to account and take action right here and be successful. And finally, we will get a free Palestine. Thank you.
So I was looking around the room and I saw that it wasn't just my eyes that were teary when Adie was talking. Absolutely, we do need to make the connect. I am a Palestinian. I haven't been home. I haven't returned to Palestine. I hope to, inshallah, with PCF one day on their delegations. And we definitely do need to do that. That's why all the unions are spending a huge amount of their funding for the international arm of their unions to send delegations to places like Palestine, to places like Mexico, Chile now, for us to be human rights observers, for us to come back and be advocates. And there are so many organizations that will help you do that. So if you have the time and you're willing to go and be there, please, please, please reach out. PCF are holding, as the chairman spoke earlier, as Shabbir Lakha said, they are going to be holding more delegations. So if you are interested, please do reach out and hopefully they can help you accomplish that. What I took from this speech is that we need to make the connect. We can have a direct impact on corporate complicity, and Palestinians walk towards bullets when they protest. So what is stopping us? Truly, what is stopping us? Hopefully we can be there alongside Shabbir when, remind us what's the
3rd of December.
The 3rd of December, and hopefully on other protests. There is an annual march called the Al-Quds Day March that happens on the last Sunday of Ramadan every year in London. It's huge. I don't see many people there, and it's incredible, and we should all stand there, along with all other Palestine protests that hopefully will be more publicized. Okay, this is the official end of the speeches. What we will have are some of our stewards handing out the mics to anyone who would like to throw any questions up. Yes, we have. Okay, so I'm going to be sitting down. I'll kind of number you out. If we can have some of our stewards please be handing out the mics. So we'll take you, young lady. Can you please stand up?
Can people hear me? Because I can probably talk without a mic. It's just for the filming. Okay.
So this is one of our cyclists from the delegation. Round of applause to her. Woo!
Thank you, although I will actually have to say that I wasn't able to cycle, but I was a very good water monitor, wasn't I? While we've been here, it's just come out on the BBC News. Jewish settlements are no longer illegal, according to the USA. So I just thought I wanted to point that out. What I did want to say was, so I stayed out a week longer, and I was helping with the olive picking. And as I'm sure people know here, that the settlers are constantly destroying the olive trees. And in fact, I think there's something like 1,000 olive trees are about to be demolished in Bethlehem under Israeli instruction. I'm desperate for Extinction Rebellion to speak out. And every time I say that, I get the response of like, oh no, it's not our issue. I can't agree with that. Extinction Rebellion will sort of like talk out about Bolsonaro and what's happening in the Amazon. Why on earth won't Extinction Rebellion speak out about the olive trees?
Excellent question. Who are you directing that to?
No, it's a comment.
All of you.
It's a comment. It's not a question.
Extinction
it's a comment.
Rebellion. But yeah,
it's
anyway.
a comment. It's a comment.
Thank you for that. Does anyone want to comment on the comment?
We'll wait.
Yes, Rob, if you can.
Hi, thank you very much to the entire panel and PCF for organising this great event, especially as I only found out today, it's only a year old. But as the last speaker said, Mike Pompeo has, as this meeting has been taking place, announced that the USA will no longer regard settlements on the West Bank as illegal and going to leave their status to be settled by Israeli courts. At the same time, we're in the middle of an election campaign where we're seeing the weaponization of this narrative of a new anti-Semitism, which actually goes back to the early 2000s and has been escalating on a global scale and goes far beyond simply the core proponents, supporters of Israel. And there's a number of motives for that narrative and a number of motives for the attacks on Corbyn, but clearly central is the silencing of the question of Palestine. I and others are involved in Tower Hamlets at the moment over the refusal to allow the Big Ride charity event for Palestinian children to finish in a park in Tower Hamlets. And it was very clear from a Freedom of Information request that the senior officers of Tower Hamlets based their refusal on their interpretation of the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism. And I just want to say that we would make a mistake if we think the arch proponents of this narrative are concerned, particularly those non-Jewish proponents like Trump and Orban, are concerned about Jews. These are people who are weaponizing a narrative that is being picked up by the far right, who are attacking Jews and attacking Muslims. But I think we should finish on, there should be always a note of our recognition of our strength, because wherever there's a struggle in the Middle East against the imperialist interventions, against local dictatorships, you see the Palestinian struggle running like a thread through it. And I was at a meeting on Saturday where Ilan reminded us that it's not just in the Middle East, it's in Ferguson, it's in Chile, it's wherever there's a struggle against great powers who dominate, try and oppress people and deny them their rights. And I think we need to always take heart from the strength of our side, and that's the importance of these meetings that we see that such as this taking place tonight.
Thank you, Rob. Excellent comment. Wow. Rob Ferguson is an author of many pamphlets and articles on the rise of anti-Semitism, how that's linked to the Zionist project and it not being a genuine attack on the Jewish community, but rather it's being used to weaponize against those people rallying to Palestine. So that comment is. Thank you so much for contributing to the event. You should be up here instead of me, to be honest, Rob. Do we have any other comments from the floor? Well, yes, please.
Can you say more about how to engage the religious ideas of the British, particularly the Church of England? For instance, the day after the first big March of Return, on the Sunday, there were songs of praise, which had a interesting singing, but gave as the reading, as part of the lectionary programme, the biblical charter from Genesis chapter 8, I think verse 15, which said the extent of the gift of the land.
And I'm assuming that is directed to Ilan, who mentioned the religious
really.
link.
I don't know how to engage the Church of England in this debate.
That's an excellent comment. Ilan, will you take that?
How to engage with the Church of England. You're asking a Jew how to engage with the Church of England. Well, but I think you have a point here. We can see it among African American communities, what you refer to, that the narrative of the Old Testament, which is actually a book of faith, which is a book of imperatives, of how a person should deal with another person and how a person should behave towards God. The Zionist movement, and before that Christian Zionism, took this holy book and turned it into a historical study, into a political program. And the Church of England has a responsibility here to make sure that the interpretation of these verses should remain religious, should remain in the realm of faith, and not be politicized, and not referring to the question at all is as bad as supporting the political interpretation. That, as I said many times before, the Bible was adopted as the legal proof for the Zionist movement towards the Christian world by Jews who were secular, who were atheists. As I said, they did not believe that God exists, but they believed that God promised them Palestine. And I think that this is something that the church should deal with. Apart from we still haven't heard a proper kind of self-searching project with dealing with anti-Semitism in the Catholic Church, in the Anglican Church, and so on. But I think you're right. There's something there that should be pointed to, but I doubt whether they will do it.
There's a College of Bishops which decides the lectionary programme, what should be announced in church every Sunday. It's a 2-year programme, and I think there are about four occasions which are directly or can be heard politically.
Yes, I agree, but I'm saying that they have a role here in regaining or reclaiming a very important human text that is about faith and about humanity and was used in order to justify colonization, oppression, and even genocide. So we should hear them, but I hope we will.
I actually have an interesting story to contribute. We have this issue also in mosques and in Muslim spaces. So after the Christchurch massacre, there was a meeting held at a local mosque in southwest London, and they invited a prevent officer, they invited a local councillor and 2 Zionist rabbis to come to the mosque and to be like, you know, we share your pain, we're here to give our condolences. And a few of us decided to attend, to ask the pertinent questions of, you know, how can you say that you condemn this, but you must also condemn what is happening in Palestine? To which they said, we were against all killing everywhere. And actually what ended up happening was the Muslim community turned on the people there trying to disrupt this meeting or trying to ask the right questions, saying that we were being anti-Semitic for asking these self-identified rabbis as pro-Zionists, some of them being on the Board of Deputies, for questioning them. So I don't think this is an issue that only targets the Christian community. I think this is infiltrating in all communities. Also, from what I understand, some Sikh communities have also been infiltrated on that side. They have been weaponized against the Muslims because, you know, it's not those brown people that's the problem, it's these brown people that's the problem. So sadly, it's an issue across all faith. Faith is being used as a weapon as everything else is. Thank you so much for that question, and thank you, Ilan. There is another question that I hope I can ask before anyone else from the audience jumps up. You guys are very excited, it seems. How can we get a UK arms embargo with Israel? Adie, would you like to jump at that?
I mean, there's a couple of things. Obviously, there are 4 Israeli arms factories, Elbit factories around the country. There's a couple in the Midlands. There's one in Oldham, where we are, and one in Kent, the Instro factory. That is the first one that's going to go to court, actually. They have occupied it when we did in July the 1st. They've also occupied it again 2 weeks later because they were so annoyed they weren't all arrested because they got told they could go home on the same day. They came in with a camera and sprayed war criminals all over the factory, and then the cops said, all right, you can go if you want, and that was it, and they went home. But the next time they have got arrested, and they've got a court case, by the way, on the 17th of February, so it's worth supporting them because obviously they need support. But there's also obviously these campaigns that you can join and get involved in that is also about letter writing. It's also about going to the factories for the big days of action, and obviously, look, there's a big deal about the Corbyn thing, okay? Because, you know, I'm door knocking all the time because one of the possibilities, it's not certain and it may not 100% be in the manifesto, but it was passed at conference for the past 2 years, was to call for an arms embargo, a 2-way arms embargo with Israel. This would be the biggest BDS victory, in my opinion, of the whole world. If a militaristic state like this somehow came up with an arms embargo with Israel, and like Ilan said about the message it would send to the rest of Europe, and perhaps the confidence even it would give to the possibility of even something like this, because the weapons have gone up under the Tories. 86 million it was 2015, then it went up to 220 million, sorry, 2017, 220 million a provision, and there's you know, it was like it's like they've increased the weapon stock since they bombed Gaza and killed 2,200 people. The weaponry sales have gone up. They're developing their weapons. So that reversal, and not to mention the $5 billion they're giving to Saudi Arabia over the last 5 years to decimate Yemen, you know, these things, with this possibility, I do recommend in the short term, get out and door knock and get Corbyn in as fast as you can for the next month at least. After that, yeah, we can build and we can take them on with the arming Israel. You can still continue the HSBC campaign. They still invest in Caterpillar, get to your local actions there. There's the Puma campaign, obviously. But, you know, it's up to you. You can take action. You can take direct action. You can take online action. It's just got to be more dynamic. You've got to front up. You've got to give it more. And we can get an arms embargo. It's not impossible. Okay, so it's these different threads that we have to follow.
Thank you, Shabbir.
Yeah, if I can just add, I mean, I think Adie's absolutely right. And what we've seen so far is a complete lack of political will to actually do anything about the armed situation. When Gaza was being bombed in 2014, the effect of popular opposition to that meant that an investigation was carried out into British licenses for arms that had been sold to Israel, and at least 12 export licenses were identified for weapons that could have currently, at that time, been being used against Palestinians in Gaza. And yet nothing was done about it. They weren't cancelled, nothing happened, they're still there today. And so it is important to recognize the magnitude of having a Prime Minister who's pledged to impose a 2-way arms embargo, and we should do everything we can to get him elected. At the same time, we also need to recognize that the biggest front of attack on Jeremy Corbyn and his policies is on foreign policy, and in particular on Palestine. And it will only get much, much worse if he actually does become Prime Minister. So when he does become Prime Minister. And so we need to be mobilized and organized and ready to defend the project and to push it further and to hold it accountable if you know, things go bad. And just to give one example is that when Gaza was being, when protesters in Gaza were being shot last year in one of the bloodiest days of the Great Return March, we all know Jeremy Corbyn supports Palestine. We know that he stood with Palestine for a long time. But there was absolute silence from the Labour leader's office at that time. And we then organised a demonstration in opposition to those killings, and Jeremy Corbyn produced a statement to be read out at that demonstration. And it was a brilliant statement, and it was true to his principles, and it allowed him to express the solidarity with Palestinians in a very public way. And that's the role we can play in making sure that Jeremy Corbyn and the movement stays true to what it stands for. So, yeah.
Thank you. We have a question at the front.
Thank you. Well, thank you to the Palestine Community Foundation for organizing this conference. Essential, vital in the current climate, and having this very impressive range of speakers and giving further clarification. I mean, Ilan Pappé from, I mean, all of you, really, I've learned a lot this evening. And the United States might have decided, unsurprisingly, that the settlements are now legal. Well, they are still illegal in Britain, they're still illegal in Europe, they're still illegal in the international world. Now, we talked about arms embargo. Now, these weapons are being used by illegal settlers. Terrorism, you know, is also, excuse me, I'm a bit emotional here. Basically, the settlers are also sort of committing act of terrorism, eco-terrorism, by uprooting thousands of olive trees with the complicity of the army. It's not the IDF, it's the settlers' occupation force. Now, they are allowed to actually visit freely the Great Britain. They come here visa-free. I think it is, they're committing crimes against humanity, just like the IDF, the IOF is committing crimes against humanity. Some of them, unfortunately, are dual nationals. Now, surely, just like the British government make a stand by prosecuting, banning, taking away citizenship from people who are involved in terrorism, surely they must make a stand against individuals who are involved in crimes against humanity.
I'm sorry, a mic was given to the lady over there, but also, can the gentleman speak? No, please go ahead.
Again, just to sort of support the speakers have been great, thanks very much. In the 80s, the BDS was incredibly important in helping to stop anti-apartheid, but one of the really big coalescing of sort of support was around an anti-apartheid movement. So you had lots and lots of different groups, you had the unions, everything else. How do the panel see that sort of support coalescing around something when there isn't that sort of singular view? There are lots of amazing organisations like yourself, you know, up in Scotland there's the SPSC, there's Jazz, there's lots of different things, but there is a lack of a single sort of unifying voice to help to stop the apartheid that's actually happening in Israel. What do you think is the answer to that?
So you're saying, just so that I understand your question, you're asking why is there not one entity, or what kind of entity can they all kind of umbrella under?
It's an umbrella, and that's what happened with anti-apartheid. There was the cooperative movement, there was the communist movement, there was the unions, there was the students, and there is a groundswell just now. But it's just how do you then sort of build on that to get that momentum and to get that
excellent question.
Power? So.
Yep, go for it, Adie.
Yeah. I mean, look. A more difficult thing, I think, is that there's not the ANC in South Africa. Obviously, there was a united front there in terms of a call for BDS. Now, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions was a call from 2005, and it's signed up by all the major parties in Palestine, and it's also got 200 Palestinian civil society organisations. So, as much as it's not perfect, and it's a rights-based thing, right of return. Ending the occupation, tearing down the wall, and equal rights for Palestinians in 48 Palestine. So this is they've had to fudge it because it's difficult to know exactly how it's all going to turn out, what's the solution going to be, and all the rest of it. But in terms of internationally to have a coordinated route, I think a lot of groups are supporting boycott, divestment, and sanctions in England. When I think of all the major groups, I mean, I'm with Manchester Palestine Action, but also with Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and we've had pretty good coordinated actions all around the country, and Scottish PSC, who I also know, did do actions on HSBC. So HSBC and Puma are two of the major national targets, along with Stop Bombing Israel. There is ongoing coordination now. As I said, now Huda is galvanising groups like she did in Manchester with campaigning through PSC. We're having coordinated groups, days of action with 40 actions, 30 actions for Puma Day of Action, 40 actions at stores and Puma offices and things like that, and HSBC offices all around the country on a day of action, and weekly and monthly actions in different places. So the Boycott National Committee in Ramallah has called for people to just take actions on BDS, and ideally it's like people are doing it off their own back because they understand their local conditions. Who are the local culprits? What's the local complicity? With a few big targets that we can win. We think we can win Puma. They hate these demonstrations, with lots of people outside showing pictures of Palestinian footballers that were shot and killed, talking about the illegal settlements where the football teams are from Israel, 6 of them. They hate it, and it's great publicity. It's a great way to mobilise. And so I think that we need to improve it by a mile, and we work with the Palestinian groups like this one in Manchester and others, and they come on a lot of these BDS actions. I think it needs more focus generally amongst all groups, but I think that we're coming on a bit now. I think there's a possibility. This last year has been promising, in my opinion. It's better, I've been doing this for a while, so I'm a bit of a cynic normally, believe it or not, but I think there is some things happening now in terms of coordination. It's really it's all there if you want it, in my opinion. It's about people stepping up and getting involved now, and I think it's right there. I've outlined some ways you can do it. You can Google this stuff, and then get stuck in.
Can I just ask something to clarify your question? Sorry. Do you mean is there coordinated action with the different groups doing stuff in the UK, or do you mean is there a unified vision coming up Palestine for people to align themselves to?
Sorry, yes, it's a unified vision. It's a unified vision coming out mainly out of Palestine. Yeah. So BDS was incredibly powerful. I was in the anti-apartheid. We were on the Great March, that sort of, was in Hyde Park, etc. So it was an instrument to help, and I know that Omar Barghouti sort of helped to sort of start this off. But I think it's more that unified voice that comes from the Palestinians. So you've got, Ilan Pappé had said, there's a sort of death of the two-state solution because of what, Trump did, with the Jerusalem thing. So and there's a two-state solution, there's a one-state solution. I think it's that unified thing. This is what do we do? What does the Palestinians need for us to help them on the next journey?
Can I just a short comment? I agree with you. It is a problem, and I do think it's it's something that the Palestinians need to sort out in order to provide the leadership that, say, the ANC did, in order for solidarity actions around the world to be pushing all in the same direction. So it's true, BDS isn't a substitute for this because BDS is a tactic. It's not a political vision. And it's also, I think it's much more powerful when a political movement or organised actions have a demand for something positive as opposed to simply defining what it is that they're opposed to. And I think, although BDS talks about the 3 rights of the Palestinian constituencies, it's still basically asking for a negative thing. It's basically saying to people, divest from Israel, be opposed to Israel, rather than this is a vision that we would like everybody to get on board with and support. And it's a problem, but I think the Palestinian national movement is in a period of transition. I mean, there is a shedding of the old order gradually. I fear it could limp on in this very kind of debilitated state for a long time, but I think eventually something will supersede it. But I mean, I don't know what Ilan thinks, but I think that, you know, the transformative work to replace the old with the new is going to have to take place from Palestine and by Palestinians primarily.
I want probably to echo the last speaker in many ways. I think that there is an historical opportunity that can be missed. I mean, some historical opportunities are missed. There is a change in the public opinion in the world, not among governments, but there is definitely a different opinion about Palestine and civil society around the world, and the lack of unity on the Palestinian side and the crisis of the national liberation movement disables the Palestinian from making the best out of this historical opportunity. There's no doubt about that. What you can do in Scotland is continue to do what you do. That's, for me, the essence of solidarity. The essence of solidarity is to wait for the people of Palestine to tell you what they need from you, rather than you tell them what they need. And it's difficult, I agree. And in many ways, the BDS was brilliant in the sense that it found a way of galvanizing more support and activity despite the fragmentation, the lack of unity, and so on. I think that there will be a transformation, but we have to be aware that it's a very long process. It's a long process. The lack of success on the ground of the Palestinian liberation movement means that there is now a call and an urgent need to redefine the project of liberation. And it's a very young community, the Palestinians, wherever they are. I think 50% of the Palestinians, wherever they are under 18. So it's a young community that is very assertive, very politicized, but will need a lot of time to rebuild a liberation movement that could send you a unified message about the future. But while it's happening, there's so many urgent things we have to do in order to stop the clock of destruction that despite this disunity and lack of clear vision about the future, there's so much else. And we heard today how much we have done so far and how much we can still do. So, you know, you're stating in a way, I don't want to offend you, but you're sort of stating the obvious in a way, which is okay, which is important. But I think it's much more a question of distribution of labor. It's a question of distribution of labor. I never thought that the Palestine Solidarity Committee in Britain should be engaged with the question whether they support a two-state or one-state. I think they all should support the decolonization of Palestine. And they may have different ideas of how to do it, but if they want to be part of the project of liberation, they have to be part of the Palestinian liberation movement, not part of the Solidarity Network. The role of a Solidarity Network is not to replace the liberation movement with its vision for the future. Its role is to ask the liberation movement, what can I do for you right now, given the reality as it is?
We are running out of time. I will take the last two contributions, the gentleman over there and the lady over here. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. I don't wish to be seen as a Zionist sympathizer or anything like that, but I do want to express an opinion that may be slightly different to what we've heard this evening. I have sympathy and certain empathy, personal empathy to the actual concept of Zionism itself, which is from my interpretation, a liberation movement of the Jewish people. And I have that I have that expression of feeling due to my personal family history and due to the wider Jewish history as well. So without going into the politics of today and what's going on in Israel and the Middle East, I have a very simple question, and it's important to me because I would love to find some way forward in the Middle East that satisfies the rights of Palestinians and satisfies the rights of Jews. Is there any type of Jewish state that the panelists find acceptable that could exist in the Middle East? I've got a feeling that Ilan Pappé doesn't think so from the comment he just made before, but is there any, going back to 1967 borders, any justification at all for the existence of a Jewish state next to a Palestinian state?
I'd like to start by saying something. Should we take the next question? Okay, and then we'll come back to that, we promise. Yes. Sorry, the young lady. Can a mic be brought down quickly? Or you can just shout it out, we can hear you.
It's a little bit of a tangential question, I'm sorry, but it's just going back to the point of it being a moment of reckoning, because obviously we're in the midst of this most important election of maybe, well, certainly my generation. And I think in electing somebody like Jeremy Corbyn as our first anti-imperialist Prime Minister, we've got somebody who's threatening to hold a mirror up. Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah, we've got somebody who's threatening to hold a mirror up to this country's extremely dark history of colonialism, which is, as we've been hearing, just completely criminal and brutal in every way. And this is something that this country has tried to repress and deny for centuries now. And I think in order for us to be building a solidarity with Palestine, which is absolutely crucial, not just with Palestine, but all over the world, I think we need to come to terms, this country needs to come to terms with that dark history. And we've heard already about how Jeremy Corbyn's going to introduce history lessons about this country's history of colonialism. And I was just wondering what more we could be doing to build towards that, because that's going to be a really crucial struggle in getting people to face up to this crime that's been committed to the Palestinian people. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to build effectively solidarity with them.
Thank you. That's a great comment and a question for later. So I'm no historian, and I'm certainly not an activist at the level of my comrades here. But from what I know from the history of Palestine is that Jews and Christians and Muslims have lived peacefully for many years in Palestine before the creation of the colonial settler apartheid state of Israel. Yeah, please. No, that's all I really have to say in terms of is there a, but please let Ilan, please Ilan.
I think that it's very important to understand what Zionism means by a Jewish state, and therefore answer your question in that way. And the only interpretation of a Jewish state that matters is the Zionist interpretation. For instance, the ultra-Orthodox Jews' interpretation of a Jewish state is very different from the Zionist one. The ultra-Orthodox Jewish interpretation is that a state is not now at all necessary because this is tampering with the will of God, and Jews cannot decide themselves about such a thing. So we're talking about the project of Zionism. The basic idea of the project of Zionism is that a Jewish state can only exist if the Jews are the majority, if the Jews are in control, if the Jews have superior rights to anyone who is not a Jew. And basically, there is an agreement that the more territory of Palestine you have and the less Palestinians in it you have, the more thriving and successful you are as a Jewish state. Now, there are tactical discussions in Israel, and there were tactical discussion in Zionism, how best to achieve this idea of a Jewish state, which again, I clarify, it's very important. A Jewish state is based on demography, first and foremost. Now, for me as a Jew, whose family was killed by the Nazis, who were using demography of Jews in Germany in order to justify the genocide of Jews, the fact that Israel is using demography as the main signifier of what is a Jewish state is unacceptable morally. It's unbelievable that I should treat my Palestinian friends as a demographic problem, as a demographic bomb, as one of my colleagues in Haifa University used to say to them. So you can't, unfortunately, maybe from a certain perspective of the more genuine side of Zionism, which was to save Jews from persecution in Europe, you cannot have a Jewish state the way Zionists, any Zionists, from left to right, understand it, without sanctifying the idea of a demographic majority. Or in the case of the right wing in Israel, you sanctify it by having the whole land and make sure that the Palestinians are not there. The left says, no, we'll have less land, so we have less Arabs in the land. This whole discussion of a state that pretends to represent the victims of the Holocaust is absurd morally, is repugnant, is totally unacceptable. I fully understand. I come from, as I say, from a German Jewish family that most of its members were destroyed in Germany, and they found sanctuary in Palestine. So I understand the notion of safety, definitely. I do understand that after three generations of settlers, you have now 6 million Jews, and a solution and a vision that the Palestinians would offer, hopefully will also offer them safety and security. But continuing the idea that the safety of the Jews can only be guaranteed by a racist ethnic state would perpetuate the conflict and the suffering of the Palestinians and of Israelis. So we have to accept as Israeli Jews, whether we came there yesterday or we are a second generation like myself or a third generation, we have to accept that we invaded someone else's homeland. And 3 generations later, we are part of that reality. I don't think there's any sense of telling us, go back home. We don't have another home. We are a settler colonial movement in that sense, not a colonialist movement. We're not the British in India who could go back to Britain. We are like the South Africans, whites. We are part of historical Palestine now. But we cannot be part of that historical Palestine on the basis of an apartheid state.
Thank you so much, Ilan, that was so inspiring. Thank you. The last comment that was, or question that was posed is, what can we do to contribute to teach Britain about its dark colonial past? Now, I can speak just very briefly as a teacher. I have colleagues in the history department who till this day are having to teach the benefits of colonialism. And if there is a big movement in the NEU, in the National Education Union, that is trying to decolonize the curriculum, we understand that a lot of history is taught from a certain lens, and we are still having to look at, we're still having to dehumanize people and looking at things in terms of benefits and cons. What can we do? The movement has to come from teachers, and I think it is coming from teachers. There are lots of teachers who are going off curriculum to discuss these really important questions. I know, for example, in my own school, we have a whole scheme of work now on the Windrush generation, and when hopefully Labour come into power, I think there will be a lot more trickle down in terms of hopefully a formal apology that will come, and therefore the curriculum will automatically change, and we will be able to discuss Israel in terms of its settler colonial apartheid movement. A huge round of applause to our guests, please, and our panelists. Thank you so much for being here. And if I can also just thank you all for being here. It's late, it's a Monday night. I understand the difficulty it must have taken for you to be here, and thank you for staying till the end. Just before we go, there is one last request that I want to make of you. We would like a group picture of if everyone would be able to come to the front, and I'd like to explain to you why. A 32-year-old Moath Amrene, I hope I'm saying his name right, I'm probably not, shame that I'm Palestinian and I'm not saying his name right, was hit with a bullet in his left eye while he was covering clashes between Palestinian youth and Israeli border police forces in the Hebron area town of Surif on Friday. He was clearly marked as a journalist. He was wearing a press vest and helmet at the time and was surrounded by journalists who were covering the protest. He's lost his vision and will have several surgeries hopefully in the coming days. What we ask of you is if you can please stand, if you can come to the front so we can have a group picture with us covering our right eye with our right hand in solidarity of this journalist. Thank you.
Thank you. Good. Thank you very much.